Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Well, it's been a long time since The Rise of Skywalker came out, but they finally have revealed exactly how Palpatine was able to come back. And we're going to talk about it right now.
You're listening to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Two fans, two generations, all things Star Wars begins now.
Hello, everybody. I'm Eric Vansel.
I'm Daryl Sanders.
And we're your hosts for this show. So, you know, finally, yes, finally we're going to get to really figure this out. You know, how this whole thing happened, because this is one of the biggest criticisms that we had, obviously, going into this whole thing, as far as how on earth did Palpatine come back?
Right. Yeah, I mean, and I know a lot of people feel like, Palpatine coming back kind of tarnished or ruined the end of Return of the Jedi. I've kind of had some second thoughts about that, but I'll get into that a little bit later. But
Really?
yeah, I mean, yeah. But I mean, I'm glad they're actually trying to answer this big question. I still see some plot holes in it, and we'll certainly talk about that, but this is interesting.
Well, yeah, I mean, honestly, I agree. I think it's not only interesting, I think it's one of the things that they have yet to really had been able, well, before now, obviously, they have not really been able to explain this to really anybody's satisfaction. And I think that this is a big thing that, they would have to do, because, I mean, obviously, this is one of the things that I think is a reason why people really didn't like The Rise of Skywalker in a lot of ways, or I think at least, people's problems with it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I definitely get it. I mean, everybody was, on one hand, was kind of really excited because, of course, everybody loves Palpatine, and they love, this completely, evil character, and it's just like he is, the Sith, as he so stated in the movie. But I think that, honestly, in my opinion, I would have been okay. I would have been more okay, put it this way. I would have been more okay with Palpatine coming back if they would have announced it either in the first movie, either, The Force Awakens, or at least Last Jedi.
Right. Well, and I think for me, I would have been even more okay with it if they had put this in some sort of a comic or a book. And again, I mean, one of the criticisms I always say is you shouldn't have to read a book or a comic in order to understand what was going on in the movie. The only way that they really explained this in universe, in the actual film, was they recycled that whole line, what was it? The Force contains things some consider to be unnatural. Crap, I forgot the stupid line.
Oh, the dark side of the Force leads to a path where some things can be considered to be unnatural.
Unnatural, yeah, that's it. And I mean, that was basically their explanation. That was their way of saying, well, we kind of told you that there's just some things in the dark side that are kind of unnatural, and that's what was going on. And I mean, even a lot of casual fans understand that Palpatine does have pretty much an affinity for cloning and trying to do that, So basically, do you want to maybe tell us exactly how this whole thing came about, or?
Well,
we didn't talk about this one too much before the show, guys.
Well, I mean, here's the thing. So, I mean, you actually kind of sent this to me, and I thought it was great because, this has been one of those things that, a lot of us as fans have kind of like wondered, like, okay, they really didn't explain his return very well.
Not at all.
And even in this, there's still like some plot points that I see that need to be addressed. So I'll just take you through my kind of thoughts on it, and then you're free to chime in on those, or you can give it your opinion on it. So I would have been more okay if they would have won. Of course, we've been saying it since all this started. If they would have just planned this, all right. Well, let's just get that out. We know they didn't plan any of this crap, but let's just say they did. I would have been okay if they would have planned it to the point, and it would have been a cool story, honestly, because we already had some things established. All right, so we've already established that Palpatine was kind of, into the whole cloning thing, hence the Clone Wars. We had a whole movie about it, and then a whole 7-season, animated series about it. So that's already been established. Fine, I can hang with that. Now, if we also even had the line in Revenge of the Sith where Palpatine's sitting there talking to Anakin, and he's like, if we can find the secret to immortality, basically, even he kind of alluded to Anakin that he
Yeah,
knew it already.
There was definite foreshadowing there, no doubt.
Yeah, and then afterwards, after he becomes Darth Vader, he said, well, together we can discover the secret.
Mm-hmm.
All right, cool. Once again, I'm fine with that. So now you've already established what we call premise. Like, it's already been kind of established with the context, of movies prior to. Even though this wasn't thought about when Return of the Jedi was created, fine. You still have allowed yourself this room to do this. Now, if you get to The Force Awakens, either one, you introduce Palpatine's like possible return, like it's kind of looming, but you're not
Yes.
quite sure. You have Snoke around, but it's kind of like there's another force I'm feeling that's stronger. I can't figure out what we need Luke Skywalker to then kind of help us figure out what this is. Okay, into Luke Skywalker, Last Jedi. Now, and that's point, I can see them saying like, okay, Luke might still be disenfranchised or disgruntled about his failure with Kylo and everything like that. And at this point, Kylo is kind of assuming he's amassing power. He's already killed Snoke, which is basically almost a weird rejected clone of Palpatine anyway. So okay, now he feels like I can ascend to basically the throne of being, supreme leader. All right, so now you enter Palpatine. Now you really just bring Palpatine back at this point, and where you don't necessarily need to see him, but we can hear him. We could, see some holograms or things like that, or Kylo can feel the presence or something like that, or maybe there's something that's coming on a secure channel. He hits the channel, Palpatine pops up, and everybody goes, "Whoa, he's really back." Now, you can establish this by saying like, okay, yes, Palpatine, found a way to. He already had contingency plans. Plus, this was already in the book, right? He was always obsessed with his mortality. This was always, acknowledged in the book. Lost Stars, I believe it was, Eric.
No, Lost Stars is basically, remember the it was kind of like episodes really like 3 through 6, but from the point of view of the teenagers. Point of view no, it was the aftermath. And let me just this is a good point. This is a good point for me to sort of jump in and talk about, because we said that this is going to be revealed, right? We said that this isn't just an opinion-based thing at all. This has been revealed. What happened is there's a Lucas Story Group member by the name of Emily Shikakani, and she basically was interviewed and was talking about how Palpatine actually came back. I mean, this is kind of a thing. So it was an actual Lucasfilm Story Group member who has revealed this. So this is not like some opinion-based thing. This is not just some other YouTuber or something like that talking about something. This isn't like a Mike Zero thing. I try not to badmouth people, but he really does deserve it. But I mean, she basically did this whole little piece on StarWars.com and was talking about this, well, this is how Palpatine came to be. And this is a really good segue into that, because you just brought up that it was the Aftermath trilogy where we really start to learn about this contingency plan that the Emperor had.
Right.
And it basically, you know, he was concerned about his own death, he was concerned about his own mortality, and he created this little contingency that would pretty much set off a chain of events should he end up dying. And then it basically goes on to talk about how, you know, he pretty much had his Sith acolyte guys or Sith disciples or whatever those guys are in Exegol start to do this whole cloning thing. He had started this beforehand, and the idea was that they would have the suitable clone. First of all, they were working on the final order the whole time, right? And then once Palpatine was dead, once he had died, they had been trying to create various vessels for him to absorb his, to get his spirit back into. But of course, the body that they had wasn't really going to do the trick. Now, they had been trying to come up with some other stuff. They had a bunch of clones of Palpatine, and actually that's how Rey was. You know, everybody kept going, oh, I just can't imagine, you know, Palpatine sleeping with somebody, and then, you know, Rey. But that's because it was actually one of Palpatine's clones that ended up siring Rey. And that's one of the reasons why Palpatine sought to destroy, because he obviously was trying to destroy these. Snoke was another one that kind of had his essence. So Snoke was another creation, and it was sort of kind of like one of Palpatine's clones, which obviously didn't turn out so great, right? Because we see how he looked. But the idea was that was an actual Palpatine clone. That wasn't just some being that Palpatine created. Even though in a matter of speaking, he did. Right. And so that clone ended up obviously running the First Order. But as Palpatine got stronger, he had sensed Rey, and he knew about Rey. And the reason why he knew about Rey was because one of his clones ended up basically having her, right, as a kid. So because he knew about that and knew how strong in the Force she was, then it's like, okay, I'm going to now use her as my new vessel. And so when you actually take all this, it really makes a lot of sense, and it's a really good story. It's just too bad we're learning about this now.
Exactly.
Which is yet another big-time misfire on Disney's part.
Yeah, and this is my whole thing, is that if they would have kind of had this as the end game in mind from day one, this would have been cool, because then now you can explain how everything kind of happens. You can explain, okay, and you can show some things, and then you can also do some different things with Luke. Now you can give Luke a better space to operate within, because he knows he has to prepare this girl, Rey, to face Palpatine, much the same the way that he had to prepare himself to face Vader. See, the reason why I don't feel like, you know, this doesn't really turn us Return of the Jedi is because really Return of the Jedi was more so about the redemption of Vader, not so much Palpatine. Palpatine was the one pulling the strings of everything. But really, if you really think about the original saga, it's about Luke and Vader. You know, that's where we were coming to. And we got that. And it was so satisfactory to see how that happened. Now, it was a plus to see Palpatine being launched over the railing and, you know, into the reactor. And, you know, it's like, okay, yeah, that's par for the course at that point.
Right.
You know, but I think that Palpatine, being who he is, being a strategic mastermind, once again, it just shows that why he was at the top of his game. So for him to coming back, I mean, and it's nothing unheard of. I mean, crap, Voldemort came back about 13 times in Harry Potter. You know, you got Jason Voorhees popping back up every 10 minutes. You know, you got, you know, you've seen villains who you thought or presumed dead. Now they found a way to reincarnate themselves or find a way to come back. So it's not a trope that hasn't been done before.
No,
and we've all accepted it.
Yeah, but do you think that it's been overused, though, and perhaps Star Wars maybe shouldn't have fallen for that one?
I get it. In some ways, it's lazy writing to a degree. However, I could understand why you would do it when you're trying to reboot a franchise. Like, if you would think about it, the whole sequel trilogy was to kind of bring fans back into Star Wars, right?
Yeah.
So we're bringing people back. We brought Han back. We brought Leia back. We brought Chewie. We brought Luke. All right. So we're bringing all these familiar people. I mean, now it would have been crazy if you'd have brought Vader back. Now that would have just been absurd, but that would have ruined Return of the Jedi, in my opinion, truly. But if you bring Palpatine back at that time, especially if you're thinking about just the original trilogy in itself, you really didn't know that much about Palpatine and what he could or could not do. We only found that out a little bit more because of the prequels and because of the Clone Wars animated series. So that kind of fleshed out Palpatine a little bit more to know that, okay, he's a little bit more calculating than what we thought. Because if you just take the original trilogy for what it was, we kept hearing about the Emperor, but we didn't even see him until Empire on a hologram. And then we didn't get to physically see him until Return of the Jedi. And he was just this old dude, that's walking around. He's feeble, so we think. I mean, so we really don't know. And we just hear Yoda keep saying, well, don't underestimate him. So Yoda's giving him credence, but we really don't know that much about Palpatine.
Well, and that's it. I mean, it said this on a few different shows too, is that there were two clues that you had about the Emperor's power, even though you didn't really see anything until pretty much the end of in Return of the Jedi. Mm-hmm. Because I would say the first glimpse of his power was when he was basically like, you no longer need those. He flicks his wrist and the cuffs come off of Luke. Mm-hmm. And up until
Luke is like, whoa.
Yeah, well, and because up until that point, that was a pretty spectacular use of the Force that you hadn't really seen.
Mm-hmm.
It was telekinesis, but it was done in such a way that was so casual and just so effortless that you started to get a little bit, because everybody points to the fact of the Emperor's Force lightning and all that, but if you really stop and think about it, that was a pretty big deal back then, especially if...
Oh yeah, definitely.
If you were like me, who you're seeing Return of the Jedi basically in real time, where you don't have the benefit of actually going back, but even like you, if you just started watching them in order, it doesn't matter if all this stuff's around. If you actually watch A New Hope and then Empire Strikes Back and then Return of the Jedi, you're essentially getting the same effect.
Right.
But the second, and I think in some ways the more telling one throughout the original trilogy, is the fact that you see how powerful Vader is. Mm-hmm. Why is somebody that powerful listening to this old guy? Mm-hmm. That was your second clue. Like, okay,
yep.
There's got to be something about this guy. Either he's ultra powerful,
or that should have been your first clue.
Well, yeah, but the only reason why I say that is because the first clue is really more like the confirmation. The reason why I put that first, well, besides the fact that I thought about it first, but the reason why I would still put that first, even if I were going to give an order here, is the fact that, yes, you can say all that stuff with Vader, but you also have to remember that you could just think that Vader was obedient out of some sort of weird loyalty to him. So it wasn't... I mean, you get the sense that he's more powerful than Vader when you look at the context of it, but you could make the argument that maybe he just has this devotion or loyalty or something like that to him.
I see what you're saying.
See what I'm saying?
And that makes sense.
It might not necessarily be a power thing. Maybe it's more of a loyalty and devotion thing. When you see those cuffs come off of Luke, that's when you realize, okay,
yeah, that's
this guy,
confirmation.
Yeah, that's confirmation.
Yeah, well, because it's like, see, this is the thing that kind of tripped me out. My first, going back to it, Return of the Jedi, is that whole conversation he had with Luke. When you first see the Emperor, first of all, like, okay, you saw like, how all the different people in the Empire were like, the Emperor's coming here. Yes, and he's most displeased with your apparent lack of progress. We should double our efforts. I hope so. He is not as forgiving as I am. So that kind of gives you the first clue, like, okay, we've seen Vader choking people like left and right all over Empire. And then he's like, well, he's not as forgiving. So either he's like more ruthless or like, and you just really, like I say, you really don't know. And then you see this old man walk out, you're just kind of like, him? Okay, what's his deal? But then on top of that, now you have a situation where now you're bringing Luke and he's like, well, the Emperor will teach you the true natures of the Force. Wait, how does he know it then? So essentially, basically, it's kind of like, uh-oh. And then once you see that confirmation of that, yeah, when he walks up, you no longer need those, and he just does this.
Yep, and it's so funny you say that because Dwight just commented that in,
right?
Because that was the point right there. That's the point where you do this. So now we have finally. So Brittany Taylor basically writes, and this is funny too because you guys all have to know that she's always talking about the Chiss and the Grisk and all that. But basically saying, what about the Grisk attack on the Chiss? Had they forgotten? The end of BB has me worried that they're going Heir the Empire, not Grisk. Well, not necessarily, though. Not necessarily. And I'll tell you why. Because the difference is that I still think there's hope for the Grisk to be the greater enemy going forward. Simply because even with all of Palpatine's setup and everything that they've done with Rise of Skywalker, Palpatine was still nervous about something that was in the unknown regions. He had sensed a dark side presence, and he was setting things up. And in fact, this contingency plan that we keep talking about that was set up in the Aftermath trilogy was basically him trying to create the final order, which of course we did see in the Rise of Skywalker, but also basically him trying to combat whatever he might face in the unknown regions. Now, whether or not that was actually the Grisk or not, we don't know, but I do find it strange that as soon as Rise of Skywalker comes out, now you're getting all these Chiss-based novels with Thrawn, and now the Grisk are starting to come to the forefront a little bit. So I still have hope that that's what they're going to do. And, as we have said a million times, Thrawn really is the future of this franchise, if you really stop and think about it.
Yeah.
But going back to this, too, Dwight says, stark difference between when Vader arrived versus when Palpatine arrived. Yeah, I mean...
Mm-hmm. Yeah, first of all, like, you just had a couple of people that showed up when Vader showed up. Like, when the Emperor popped up, like, the whole battalions, like, you had, like, rows and rows and rows of people just, like, showing up on this Star Destroyer, or the Death Star, really, just basically, like, all right, we got to come greet this guy with full regalia. Everybody's got to, all hands on deck, pretty much.
That's a good point. I never really stopped to think about that, but that's true.
That is, like, when Vader
that
shows
is
up,
true.
it's like,
well,
right, he got a nice little, little entourage that pops up to come welcome him back to the base. But when Palpatine shows up, oh yeah, it's like, I mean, you just saw like all the ships and everything coming in.
Yeah, but I mean, see, but that doesn't necessarily equal power. That could just equal rank. It's almost like if you got the Secretary of State visiting versus the president. I mean, you could almost look at it like that, though.
True. But that's what I'm just saying. But just even that rank wields a certain level of power. And I think that's just, and once again, it goes back to like what we were saying, like, okay, holding Vader. Because even like, and I could understand because even when Leia said it, Leia said, well, Tarkin, I figured it was you who was holding Vader's leash. Everybody knows how powerful Vader is. But the fact that Tarkin still outranked him was like,
and that's it. That's what I was going to say.
Like that few good man thing.
Right.
He outranks you, Danny.
Right. And I mean, there could be, and that's it. There could be, and that's where you really didn't get a sense of Palpatine's true power until in the middle of Return of the Jedi, because you could say, well, maybe it was a loyalty thing, or maybe it was a rank thing, and Vader was just respectful of that.
Yeah.
Now, of course, Joanne brings up a question. Were all the villains clones at one point? No.
Well, I guess, which villains are you referring to? Like,
well,
I mean, if you're talking about Rise of Skywalker, if you're talking about like Snoke, and yes, there was multiple clones of him, so to speak. Yeah, I
Yeah, well,
guess
I can see why
you
somebody
could say
would
that.
would say that. Dwight responds and says, "Not all villains were clones. Only the Grand Army of the Republic were clones for the most part." So he kicked
Yep.
in the answer. But yeah, you could see that because with Palpatine's obsession with clones. Now, granted, that was actually done for the Grand Army of the Republic, and of course,
Hmm.
it's interesting because with all of Palpatine's obsession with cloning, he more or less started getting away from it. And what's funny about it is I sort of liken it to when he first had the droid army and he went in that direction, and then he decided, yeah, you know what? Let's not do that. Let's get something better.
Hmm.
And so he got the clones. And then he
Hmm.
started doing the whole cloning thing, and then all of a sudden it's like, well, you know what? These guys are cool, but they're not necessarily loyal to this new empire. We need to start from scratch and get people that are passionate about this thing.
Hmm.
So I definitely think that it's really fascinating that with Palpatine's obsession with cloning, that he didn't try to do more of it. Now, granted, in the expanded universe, you get a little bit of that
Well, I think he
because,
kind of wanted that to himself, though. I think that was the whole thing. It was like, cause see, I could understand like you don't kind of want that because even what we've learned from watching Bad Batch, like the last episode, episode 15. I won't talk about 16, but 15.
oh wait,
We see
did
them
you
kind
see
of.
16?
I did.
Okay,
Um,
I did not
but as
naturally, but we'll be
naturally,
reviewing it
as
Monday. So,
but as they started to destroy, uh, the city and Camino, it's like, okay, well, why would you destroy this whole facility? Why are you just taking some of the medical people away and trying to like he wants to basically erase any trace because like once again, it's all about controlling um the board. So it's like, all right, I don't want anybody else to have this technology but me. I want to hold all the cards. And so I think that's where Palpatine was with the cloning thing. It's like, all right, I'll kind of work on this secretly away from everybody because Vader probably didn't even know, like no one probably even knew about any of all this stuff. And um and so I think that's where you have somebody like Palpatine. It's kind of like, all right, I'm keeping this as my little tuck off, so I can actually, do my thing. So in case I do need to come back or I want to come back, you know, I have this available to me.
well,
But my big
here's
thing, go ahead.
well, I think what's interesting, and that because that leads me to a question actually. So I didn't want to
Okay.
really lose this point is the fact that what I find funny about this whole explanation is it's almost as if the Final Order Sith troopers, it's almost implied that they're clones too. Even though I don't necessarily think that they are, this thing from this story group person, I mean, you can interpret it either way. 'Cause she really doesn't come out and say that they were clones. And it did seem that she was only really talking about Palpatine at that point, but, where are you recruiting all of these troopers? Especially
Well,
out in
I
Exegol.
yeah, I mean, I think that either I think they probably either have them siphoned off from like the original First Order, like kind of like your elite like troopers, and they said like, oh, we have a special assignment or something for
Yep, you're
you.
going to Exegol. Where?
Yep.
Don't worry about it.
Like, don't worry about it. You'll get there. You know, because just like what was that one there's that one admiral that was he kind of was taking over the First Order with Kylo.
Oh, you're not talking about
Uh
um oh, Hux?
no, not Hux. The other guy is like the older guy that
Oh,
eventually,
yeah, he had
but
a
he was
cool
working for
name too.
Palpatine. He was working for Palpatine the whole time.
Yeah,
Remember?
yeah, 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 yeah,
That's
yeah.
what I'm saying. Like, so he probably kind of orchestrated some stuff behind the scenes where Kylo didn't even of course wouldn't have known about it. But my biggest thing is, so going back to this whole point of these clones that Palpatine had, right? One of them, created Rey.
Yeah, he basically
Palpatine.
had somewhat of a horny clone.
My thing is like Palpatine is kind of like, if you're cloning him, you're cloning his essence. He's pure evil. So it was like, okay, why would these clones
Well,
create this child, then hide it? Like,
he could have been
that sound
defective because remember, I mean, it sounds like I'm making a joke, but I'm really not because these clones were not perfect clones of Palpatine.
true.
They were all messed up in many different ways. Now with Snoke, it was a physical deformation, but with I forgot, they actually gave the name to the Rey's dad, but in that case, it could have been that maybe the evil
So it's
aspect of
Omega.
it. Well, yeah, pretty much.
So basically, the Omega
I mean,
clone
Omega
basically is.
basically opens the doors for a lot of that stuff.
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, granted, she was an unaltered clone. I don't think that really necessarily applies here.
Right.
But there's a lot
I
of...
get your point, though.
Yeah,
I get your
I
point.
mean, it was a defective clone either way, so that could have been. And again, this goes back into something that I've been pointing out a lot when we're talking about the Bad Batch episodes. And that is, the more that you start to play in this established part of the Star Wars universe, the more danger that you have of not only painting yourself into a corner, but even basically having to try to come up with more questions and answers at that point, right? Because it's like you're trying to fill in all these holes, but what you're really doing is you're creating more plot holes, or you're just creating more things that need to be answered, and it's dangerous.
Yeah, definitely. I would say that. And I would definitely agree that, yeah, a lot of times you play in that sandbox, you kind of don't kind of see, you're like, okay, dang, I guess if I brought this up, then you have to, and that's what I'm saying. Like, even just my whole question about, like, well, if Palpatine's evil, like, how are you having clones?
The perfect
You know what I mean?
example.
But it's like, but then it's like, well, yeah, to your point, it's like, well, yeah, you do have defective ones, and that's why they were, what they were. But it's like, all right, because yeah, they're hiding this child on Jakku, and it's like, well, was that, of course, an intentional thing? Because originally he had a base on Jakku, so was this kind of like, was that intentional? Was it not? Like,
no, the base is on Jeddah. They had the Battle of Jakku, and the Battle of Jakku was where the whole thing was supposed to end, because pretty much Palpatine had sent that. Again, they were retrofitting thing, but this is part of the new canon. He basically decided that if he died, then the Empire didn't deserve to exist anymore. And this is where he would start over. Presumably with... Not sure if the First Order was something that just happened by design. There was always a Final Order. I'm not sure if that was just supposed to be the only thing. And the First Order just sort of popped up because the people that were left, it kind of morphed into that or what. But the idea was Palpatine had this plan where this signal or this beacon or something would go out, and it would call all the Empire above Jakku, and then he unleashed this crazy weapon that he had buried down there, and it would destroy them all. Of course, that was somewhat worded.
Yeah, okay. So I knew it was something. I knew it was something on Jakku.
Well, here's the thing that's funny, too.
Or a weapon or something.
Right. But I mean, one of the things that I absolutely love about a lot of these new canon novels is just like the expanded universe gave us Thrawn, this new canon has given us another recurrent character who, in a lot of ways, is equally cool and interesting, and that's she's a Grand Admiral or not, but Rey Sloane. Now, she's actually all the way back in the very first canon novel, or new canon novel, A New Dawn. She's a captain at that point, and then she becomes an admiral, and I'm pretty sure she became a grand admiral at some point. But they bring her up quite a bit, and then of course you also had in the Aftermath trilogy 2 Hux's dad, and you meet our Hux. I keep forgetting the first name of those guys, but it's actually pretty cool. And then of course Dwight is basically saying Operation Cinder. Not sure I spelled that right, but yeah, exactly. And
Mm.
so that is basically one of the things that had existed, and that's what Palpatine did. So it's really a question of whether or not the plan was to just, okay, the Empire's wiped out. Now are we going to go for this what became the Final Order, and they're basically on Exegol and they're being rebuilt? Was the First Order just sort of like a holdover? So, okay, pretty much enslave the galaxy until we're ready. And that's when he dispatches Snoke. Because if you think about it, and this is why it does make sense that Snoke is an actual direct clone of Palpatine and not just a creation.
Mm-hmm.
Because look at how powerful he was.
Well, yeah, not only that, but I mean, how did he also, because see, how did he ascend to that type of level of, like, of control? Because, when we hear him in, when we go back to The Force Awakens, Han is like, oh yeah, Snoke did that to to Ben and or to Kylo. Like, so he was already like a prominent person in the galaxy. Like, how did
Yeah.
he ascend to that level so quickly?
Yeah, and then of course Dwight reminds us that Armitage Hux is the one that we know from the sequels. I still wish I can remember. It's funny because I know the name of the dad, and he pops up because he actually pops up in a bunch of books, and then he goes on to point out who is a serious character until The Last Jedi, and that's an interesting point too because the Hux character was, I think, another casualty of the sequel trilogy in a lot of ways, because he really was somewhat of a threatening character in The Force Awakens. He was basically this guy who was just so devoted to the First Order, and he was just like this radical fascist guy, and he's giving that speech, which was actually chill-inducing. I mean, I remember when I first saw that in the trailers, I was like, okay, this guy's going to actually end up being some, crazy powerful guy. And then, of course, you get that stupid scene from the beginning of The Last Jedi with the... And then, of course, Hux...
Hux
and Poe.
And Poe, yeah, having that little verbal joust.
Yeah.
I guess
Now, granted... I will say this, though. That even though I guess it does somewhat bring down Hux's threat level, I really enjoyed his interplay with Kylo. I always thought that was cool, man. They were kind of like, sort of like two brothers that are always trying to sabotage each other. I mean, one of the greatest Hux scenes to me in the entire trilogy is when Kylo seems like he's almost dead and he goes to reach for his gun, and then Kylo kind of looks over and he puts it down.
Yeah, like, nope.
And of course, wasn't he the character that basically after all everything was firing on Luke, he was like, you think you got him? Or something like that.
Exactly.
See, that was funny. That was Star Wars humor. That was cool. That was actually pretty cool. And I thought that making Hux kind of like a fulcrum type of thing in Rise of Skywalker was actually a really cool twist too. I just wish they had done more with that.
Well, yeah, once they realized that, like, I guess once Hux realized that, like, it's not that I don't want you, I want you guys to win. I just don't want Kylo to win. Like, his whole methodology behind it was brilliant to me.
Yeah, and it still fit within the character, I thought, too.
Exactly. Yeah, because Hux is like that kind of sneaky, shady, kind of slimy, kind of almost like a political, because he was always trying to get like Kylo in trouble, like with Snoke, and basically playing like the good, like the teacher's pet type, character.
Yep, exactly. And I thought that was a really cool thing. So his seriousness kind of came back to me in The Rise of Skywalker. I mean, I know there are varying opinions on that, just like there's varying opinions on pretty much the whole trilogy, but I could hang with Hux there. I thought that his character took a little bit of a hit in The Last Jedi. I thought that ultimately it was somewhat resolved like toward the third act, but I could definitely see in the first act how they totally took this guy who was kind of threatening, because if you think about it, and this is what's really interesting to me, if you read Colin Trevorrow's thing, and we did a show on this, by the way, you guys can go back and check it out, where we talked about what ended up being, or would have been called, Duel of the Fates, which was Colin Trevorrow's version of Episode 9. It was very much a Hux thing. I mean, Hux was really the main bad guy in that, and I mean, he was fearsome. You know, he was destroying cities, he was... You know, there was a lot of things that he was doing. I mean, he was really powerful in that. So that was the original design.
Let me ask you this question. Do you think that Palpatine knew about the dyad in the Force with Rey and Kylo prior to them meeting up like in Exegol?
I would say that depends on how locked into Snoke's consciousness he was. Because remember, it was Snoke was the one that pretty much put that together. And if you remember what Palpatine said to Kylo when he started imitating Vader, imitating Snoke and all that, when he was basically like, I've been every voice that you've heard inside your head or whatever, and he basically imitated the voices, that was basically Palpatine saying, dude, it's been me all along. You know, you thought it was Snoke, but it was really me. So I have to, just using that, you have to just assume that Palpatine then, through Snoke, was the one that created that dyad in the Force. Not necessarily sure why he did that, unless he thought that maybe that was the key to turning her to the dark side.
No, either that, or I could see it was a way for him to have that power, because you saw like once, because you got a Skywalker, which he knows how powerful that bloodline is.
Yeah.
And then he's got his own bloodline put together. If I can siphon the two of them, which he eventually did, yeah, you saw how immensely powerful Palpatine became.
Yeah, Palpatine was undoubtedly...
Things started growing back, and his clothes even changed. Because I was just like, okay, he went from this whole little shabby, Family Dollar robe, and now he's got on like a Victorian, like Shakespearean robe all of a sudden. And I'm like, really?
Well, it's true. His powers definitely expanded in that second or third act of Rise of Skywalker, especially, he's shooting lightning up and like hitting all the ships now. And you're kind of like, okay, man, this guy he's definitely increased.
Yeah, but see, that's what I'm saying. I think that if we would have saw more of his dealings, like if they would have kind of split the time in, let's say, Last Jedi, or even if they wanted to do it in Rise of Skywalker, I think we could have done without some things in like that whole Wayfinder thing. Like,
yeah,
I think we could have done without that. If we could have eliminated that whole scene, and then just had Palpatine, kind of explaining like, okay, how he did everything. I think that would have been more satisfactory to fans.
Yeah, they could have done. There's a lot of different ways. First of all, I more or less, we've brought this up together on different shows, but you reiterated it again at the beginning, and that is, if they had set up his return throughout the entire trilogy. So you more or less establish it in 7, you carry it on in 8, and then in 9, of course, he comes back. What really would have been cool was if the movie had, how it usually kind of tilt down or whatever and reveal a planet or something. What would have been cool is if it tilted down, revealed a ship, and then on a ship, and it was just some random, freighter or something, if you were hearing, and then they started cutting to all these different cities, very similar to what they did at the end of Return of the Jedi. And it's that announcement, Palpatine's galaxy-wide announcement that he's back. I think that would have been a really strong way of opening the thing.
Yeah, definitely.
And then you could have established that and then gone on.
Yeah, because I don't think we could have because I think we could have cut out a lot of different things, in Rise of Skywalker. Like I didn't need to see the whole I mean the whole Babu, frigate in what's her name?
Yeah.
I want to say like it's not Zam Wessel, that's from
No,
Attack of
no, no, no,
Clones.
no, no. I know what you're
But
talking about,
it's
though. Man, it's so funny how we forget all these things now, which is
but
funny because they're forgettable. Even though I liked her character, though.
yeah, she was cool, but like I said, it wasn't necessary for us to really. I think you could have,
No.
especially when you got something about like Palpatine. I think you should really delve more into his whole thing
Oh,
because I think
absolutely.
that would have made more sense for a lot of fans. Is basically what I'm saying.
Well, not only that, but I mean, you could have. See, for instance, what I probably would have done, I would have kept Luke alive and
Mm-hmm.
had him sacrifice himself, much like how Obi-Wan did, but he's fighting Palpatine. And then Rey and maybe Kylo, he turns back into Ben Solo, and together they face him and defeat him.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe there was a fight earlier where Luke decides it's best to sacrifice himself because he knows that she would need to do it, much like what you brought up. Because she's Palpatine's granddaughter, it's like, okay, you have to face him and you have to pretty much win, right?
All right.
And that would have been a cool sacrifice, and that would have mirrored the Obi-Wan thing. Because even though I had an understanding of why JJ did it, I think that what they should have done was treated 7, 8, and 9 like the true sequel trilogy, much like how Heir to the Empire and all that were the true sequel books, and maybe not try to do so much of a callback to the original trilogy to almost make it feel like a soft reboot. Because that's what Episode 7 felt like to a lot of people, is a soft reboot of 4. It was a sequel, but it very much tonally and almost a lot of scenes really resembled 4.
True. Do you think? I always felt like if I always thought this would be kind of cool if they would have actually had kind of to your point where Luke kind of sacrifices himself in front of Palpatine, but does the same thing like as he's trying to hit him with Force lightning or something like that. Luke disappears, but then he actually does appear as a Force ghost right in front of Palpatine, and basically showing him like the light side would always be what you crave. You could never achieve because I can live indefinitely, basically in this form, where your mortality, you still have mortality, and so I always thought that would have been cool to kind of finally show like the light side is more powerful in the long run.
Yeah, it would have been kind of cool if he had actually let Palpatine defeat him, and then at the end he's kind of like a Force ghost now and be like, see, look what I can do.
Mm-hmm.
Dwight basically says she did what he wanted her to do, just not with anger. A loophole to me. She should have turned.
To the dark side?
Yeah, I mean, if that's what he's talking about, I mean, I could see that. I mean, I do remember on multiple shows what I thought would have been a really cool twist, and something that hadn't been done in Star Wars, is let Kylo actually turn back to the light and become Ben Solo again, but then have Rey actually go to the dark side. And now they're fighting each other again, but they're on opposite sides of what they were. I think that could have really had a lot of interesting story dynamics. And this comment that Dwight made fits into this. He goes on to say that would have been a bold twist, which it definitely would have, without question.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know if it was necessarily... I mean, it was kind of a loophole by definition, but I also thought that if you're going to go that route, it was probably the smartest thing to do, because she did do what he wanted, but she would have had to kill him in anger or using the dark side in order for his essence to transfer to her. Where what she ended up doing was killing him in a way that he couldn't transfer to her. So really, he didn't do what she wanted him to, or what he wanted her to do.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, yes, he did what he wanted her to do in the sense of killing him, but killing him wasn't really what he wanted. He wanted to basically become immortal, which I actually find is cool. And maybe because our Balance of the Force and all those episodes have been getting like 1,000 views and our other episodes don't, maybe another thing that we should explore one day and maybe dedicate a show to is the difference in how the Sith versus the Jedi go on. Because the Sith seem to, if they want to go on, it's like they have to keep inhabiting a new body, right? There's no... They do have what they call Sith spirits, but they haven't really explored that to a degree. I mean, for what we have, pretty much...
At this time.
Yeah, what's been canonized in the movies, anyway.
Yeah, that's what I'm hoping that show Acolyte reveals a whole lot more. That's why I'm so excited for Acolyte, because I really wanted to see like what the Sith side of the Jedi is like. You know, like we've seen a lot of stuff with, you know, the temple and everything like that, but we haven't seen anything really on the Sith side of things. And so that's what I'm really, really, really anxious to see how they cover that in that series.
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think that that's going to really be telling too. Now, I know Leslie Headland is the one that's actually doing the show. Is she basically the showrunner too, though?
Yep.
Okay. Well, her being such a huge Star Wars fan, and her also being extremely knowledgeable in, I really hesitate to call it the expanded universe because that usually refers to Legends, but she's familiar also with the comics and the books and all that other stuff. I mean, she's really well read as far as the whole Star Wars universe goes. So I'm looking forward to what she actually puts out there as far as this whole Sith Acolyte type series, because I think you're right. I think we're going to get finally something that's dedicated to showing us how the Sith grow from pretty much an Acolyte to a Sith Lord.
Definitely.
All right. Well, I think that's pretty much going to do it for our show today. Make sure you guys hit that like button before you leave, though. For all you guys that are chatting live. If you haven't already subscribed to us, definitely hit the subscribe button. But definitely smash that like button because it really does help our channel. And hey, we want to continue to be here for you guys and bring you more content. And of course, to that end, we're here every Monday and every Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern. So this Monday, we're going to be reviewing the final episode of Season 1, the season finale of The Bad Batch. We've been reviewing every episode of The Bad Batch. So if you guys have missed any of our episodes, any of our reviews, go back and check them out. But Monday is going to be cool.
Yep.
I've read about it. See, as usual, what happened is you actually watched it, and what I do is I go in and I read about it.
Mm-hmm.
So I know a lot of the stuff that happened. So, I mean, but you guys are going to have to wait until Monday night to actually see what goes on. And if you're watching the replay, hey, well, hopefully you go back and check it out if it's after Monday. All right, so I think with that, we're going to wrap this thing up. I'm Eric Vansel.
I'm Daryl Sanders.
May the Force be with you.
Always.
Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at HeadToHeadSW. Submit your questions for our next show. Visit our official website at headtoheadswpodcast.com. Until next time, may the Force be with you, always.